welcome everybody from the Hyde Park Book Club. Tonight we are featuring a book named Somewhere in Europe, World War II Letters of Sam Lesner. And a little bit of background. Hyde Parker Sam Lesner, at age 34, was drafted into the Army and spent 1944 and 1945 in the European Theater of Operations. And after reading his book, I realized that he couldn't tell anybody where he was specifically, just very generally. His letters home, meant to be the foundation of his war memoir, ended up in storage while he returned to life. And Sam was the movie and nightlife critic for the Chicago Daily News, a music teacher and performer, and avid gardener. And after the Chicago Daily News closed, he reinvented himself as a journalist with the Hyde Park Herald and wrote a very popular column called Hyde Parkers All. So it's a fascinating story. His daughters found all of his letters from his World War II experience many years later. And Roberta and Judy Lesner were born and raised on the south side of Chicago, here in Hyde Park, Jeffrey Manor and South Shore Valley. They both married fellow Southsider Bowen High School graduates in the late 60s. Roberta received a BA in French from the University of Chicago and an MA in French from Roosevelt University. Judy received a BA in English, Drama, and Secondary Education from the University of Wisconsin and an MA in Counseling from National Louis University. Both started their careers as high school teachers. Roberta teaching French at Bowen High School and Judy teaching English and Drama at Lyons Township High School in LaGrange. Roberta moved to Temple administration as an assistant at KAM Israel, Isaiah Israel congregation, and then executive director at Congregation Rodfei Zedek, both in Hyde Park. Eventually, she worked in university administration as a program administrator to graduate students at the University of Chicago, and finally as assistant director of the MD PhD program at the UIC College of Medicine. Judy became a registered drama therapist, using drama as therapy for people of all ages. As a therapist, she and director of CJE Senior Life Adult Day Services, she emphasized the value of creative arts in regular programming. When Roberta and Judy discovered their father's World War II letters in a hidden box in 2004, both were still working full-time. But as soon as they retired a decade later, they devoted their energies and interests full-time to bringing to light the treasure they had found. So welcome both Judy and Roberta tonight. We're so happy to have you here. I would like to make one more comment, which is to welcome the president of the Hyde Park Historical Society, Clene Hedspeth, our new president. We're happy to have you here, Clene.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you. And welcome to our amazing artists. And I'm really excited. This is the first time I'm sitting in to listen. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Clene. All right. Judy and Roberta, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we're going to share your screen. And put you on speaker.
I do that from here.
Well, I've got you on speaker view. So from now on, we're going to see you guys and your screen when you put share screen on. There we go.
Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? President Jefferson.
Lin-Manuel Miranda ends the musical Hamilton with the song, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" The song asks, "And when my time is up, have I done enough? Will they tell my story?" During his service in World War II, our father, Sam Lesner, intended to tell his story and urged his wife, Esther, to safely store the letters he wrote her daily. That she did, but upon his return, like every other returning soldier from World War II, he packed the letters neatly and safely away in his basement and never mentioned the box nor its contents to anyone, preferring to put the war totally behind him and join the rest of the greatest generation in building new lives in peacetime America. In 2004, we found the box accidentally. What a surprise. The box surfaced while I was looking for something else among all the boxes of his collected stuff under the ping pong table in my basement. And we soon learned that our experience was common. In the last 20 years or so, many children and grandchildren of World War II veterans all over the country have been finding similar boxes that were stowed out of sight in basements and in attics, and some have turned their findings into published books. And Tom Brokaw, the famous NBC news anchor, wrote a book about these vets called The Greatest Generation, in which he said about the millions who served in World War II, quote, "These men and women answered the call to help save the world from the two most powerful and ruthless military machines ever assembled. They faced great odds and a late start, but they did not protest. When the war was over, those who had served joined in joyous and short-lived celebrations, and then immediately began the task of rebuilding their lives and the world they wanted." And they didn't talk about their experiences. They did not tell their stories. What made our father's letters
chicken, mushrooms, and gravy over rice, huh? What did I do? Oh, hamburger. All right.
If we have everybody
Oh,
mute,
chicken with sausage. I have sausage.
we're hearing some people who are tuned in. Perhaps everyone check on mute. Thank you. They didn't tell their stories. And what made our father's letters special was that they were written by a professional writer who stated repeatedly they should carefully be saved to use after the war for the book he planned to write. Sam Lesner was the award-winning movie critic of the Chicago Daily News from 1945 until the newspaper's folding in 1978. He had worked at the Daily News mainly as a reviewer of theater, music, and nightlife from 1928 until he was drafted into the Army and began basic training in February 1944 at the age of 35. He served in the Army Medical Corps of the 130th General Hospital in England, France, and Belgium. Returning to the Daily News in November 1945, at which time he was offered the dual positions of movie critic and nightlife critic. After the Daily News closed down in 1978, Sam went to work for the Hyde Park Herald in 1980, writing a weekly full-page column called Hyde Parkers All. And this lasted until his passing in 1990. Our book contains the daily letters, which express the typical soldier's laments about the army bureaucracy, the food, the need to procure one's own supplies, such as soap and hangers, the awful toilet facilities and uncomfortable beds, and above all, the slowness of the mail. Sam wrote also of the war in all of its aspects: loneliness, missing his wife and new baby, making new friends in his army unit, and firsthand accounts and philosophical interpretations of what he experienced as a medic, namely, the challenges of treating the shell-shocked soldiers and then sending them right back into battle, culminating with the Battle of the Bulge on Christmas 1944. The letters are lyrical, filled with pathos. Darling, mail call in every barracks throughout the world is a brief drama of suffocating poignancy. This is the comedy of war, each guy covering up the hurt that's in him. The peaceful valley is no more. The poppies will be well nourished again. It's a great wonder to me that Mother Earth doesn't belch in agony with her gullet overfull with blood. Will men remember those moments of reunion with their children and direct their lives toward a world of peace? Or will they forget again and start fighting each other with the hatred and savagery of wild beasts? This time, we should learn what war does to young hearts and old, and truly make this a victory to end all wars. On February 1st, 1944, Sam departed from Fort Sheridan in Illinois for basic training. He made many close friends right away and found the training to be both physically challenging and emotionally exciting. February 17th, 1944, 7:15 a.m., basic training, Swannanoa, South Carolina. When we returned from a 5-mile hike yesterday afternoon, after a morning of dentist and then backbreaking calisthenics and other duties, I collapsed in a heap to rest my feet. Incidentally, on the hike, we practiced air raid diving. That is, when the signal sounds, we who are marching single file down both sides of the road dive headlong into the woods. And if you land in a swamp, well, it's just tough shit, as they say in the Army. I'll admit, it was exciting and very real. Great planes roaring overhead all the time. When I get toughened up in the body a little more, I'll enjoy that sort of thing. It's dramatic as hell. During one alarm, I looked up to see that I had foolishly chosen a tree about 1 inch in diameter to hide behind. Some protection. I feel a little less like a rusty tin soldier this morning, but my hips and legs are still screaming. February 19, 1944, 5:30 p.m. I'm slowly beginning to recall some of the moments since I entered the Army which have left a profound impression on me. Through the nightmare of processing at Fort Sheridan, I carried away the first profound emotion I have experienced as a soldier. The huge barracks, dozens of scared men trying to keep cheerful, a perfect bastard of a barracks leader who introduced us to the Army's most colorful expletive, tough shit. And a little tired guy with a face buried in his pillow, hugging a writing case with a little snapshot of a baby in it. That guy had not yet received the picture of his wife, and he was having a very tough time trying to keep his gut down. But the next night, fortified by two good pals, this soldier learned what it was all about and why it was necessary to separate men from those they loved. Suddenly, a shot was fired, and against a sky painted lavishly by a setting sun, a flag began to descend from its proud pinnacle where it had flown all day. Without any instructions or preparations, we three soldiers rose at attention the instant the shot was heard and stood proudly with a hand salute as the flag was furled in. Honey, the point is, as a civilian, you do this sort of thing because it's a tradition or something. But as a soldier, you do it with your heart. I know we weren't acting. We simply had made the transition without realizing it. I experienced the same thrill when we boarded the wonderful new troop train, which brought us to Stark Hospital. That train was built exclusively for us, Uncle Sam's soldiers.
In April 1944, Esther was able to visit Sam in Asheville, North Carolina, while he was finishing basic. He concluded his training in mid-June 1944, and after a 2-week furlough at home, he was sent to England on a troop ship at the end of July. Highly aware of censorship restraints, he wrote to Esther of this journey. July 27th, 1944, en route. My darling, what can I say? Here we are out at sea, and wherever you look, you see the might that is ours. It makes you enormously proud, and the word fear has no meaning. I can't tell you what I see around me. Our safety depends entirely upon the watchfulness of the censors. But believe me, darling, it is magnificent. We're very comfortable while above deck. No discomfort so far, and if my luck holds, I'll come through this in excellent spirits. We have an abundance of food, but I'm taking it in moderate quantities. You must believe me on one detail, that is, I'm exceedingly well and in high spirits. I haven't laughed so much in a long time. You will get this letter, no doubt, after we have disembarked safely. I regret this, since I want you to share my sense of well-being and security that I feel at this moment.
That letter is an example of most of his letters that paint a rosy picture and avoid any description of details that would worry or frighten her. She certainly was reading newspaper accounts at home that were not tales of high spirits on luxurious ocean crossings for the soldiers. But in 1986, Sam's grandson, Eddie Bernstein, interviewed him for a school history project. This was the first and only time Sam talked about his wartime experiences. The recorded interviews, which Eddie saved and gave to us, provided a sharp contrast and a truer picture of what Sam really experienced. Here is an example of such a contrast. The letter. On August 7th, 1944, he wrote, "My darling, we are approaching the end of our voyage in good order and in excellent health. This has been an experience that has enriched my life beyond estimation. Someday I'll be able to tell the story, and time will blend 1,001 details into a tale of romance and adventure." But he told his grandson, "We took a troop ship to England, to a marshalling area, where there was a great deal of organization to bring together people coming from various places into the 500-bed, 130th General Hospital. Some men had training, some did not, but we established our hospital." The stay in England lasted only a month, but truly was lovely. During the last week of August, as the liberation of France was being accomplished, Sam had the pleasure of meeting with his soldier brother, Roy, who was stationed in England. He wrote on August 24th, 1944, "My darling, what a beautiful afternoon and what excitement. I just talked to Roy over the long distance phone. He certainly sounds fine. And frankly, I think he's completely sold on England. I expect to meet Roy very soon. He says he can fly here. Imagine, after almost 2.5 years, we shall meet in a strange land. The radio brings us news of all the goings on, and the news is really something. Please save some daily news issues for me for this period of Allied victories. I want to see them. Love to all. I long for you, Sam." August 29th, 1944. Somewhere in England. "My darling, the biggest news is that yesterday Roy came from his camp and spent the evening with me. Our detachment office was kind enough to ask him to chow and to stay for the night. Need I tell you how proud I was? You know, he wears a presidential citation about which he has never spoken. He looks wonderful and has all sorts of stripes and ribbons to show for his splendid work. He was the focus of all eyes in the camp, and he promised to write to you. Our meeting, of course, was most dramatic. More later. Love, Daddy." During the first week of September, the 130th General Hospital moved to liberated France to set up a hospital in Normandy. Sam wrote on September 1, "My darling, just time for a short one to say that all goes well in a rugged sort of way this week. It's peaceful as usual in this spot, and I discovered some new vistas of magnificent beauty. Wish I could tell you just what's cooking, but that would be cut out by our so far tolerant censors. I know now that you know we have arrived safely, and a great weight has been lifted from you. That's all now, love. Be brave and be fortified with my profound love for you." However, 42 years later, in his 1986 oral history for his grandson, he described the move to France this way. We were disorganized and disoriented by the process of being ripped out of civilian life and shipped across the channel at night. It was awful. We were hustled down into the hold of the ship in the dark. We were told that an invasion had taken place over the Normandy beaches. But until we got there, we didn't know that we were coming over the same route as the D-Day landers. We made the crossing to France the first week in September and went up over Utah Beach, close to Omaha Beach, tamping through the water and onto the beaches to Carentan in Normandy. Moving up to the top, you could see the vast destruction. That bombardment must have been absolutely fierce. We were warned that there were many unexploded bombs still. You had to be careful where you stepped. You followed precise patterns and never wandered off anywhere. The bomb squad, the detonators, went through first to try to clear the paths. I thought they did a remarkable project the way they set up the camp in Carentan. In an open area, there were fields all around, and beyond, a fringe of heavy, deep forest. While establishing the hospital, the soldiers were lodged in tents, trying to find comfort and warmth in their sleeping bags.
I can work up no enthusiasm about the sanitary facilities. I need with great urgency to seek the nearest accommodation every morning, rain or shine. I trip hastily to my rendezvous with Mother Nature, only to find a vulgar straddle trench surmounted by a narrow board, elevated to the approximate height of a regulation tool.
In mid-October 1944, the 130th General Hospital moved from Carentan, France, to Ciney, Belgium. But from Sam's 1986 oral history, we learned we took over a long-standing hospital that had been occupied by the Germans. After they were driven out, we moved in. It was beautifully equipped. Most of our stuff was left. We built our own living quarters. It was winter and we worked outdoors pouring a concrete platform. We were knee-deep in concrete, on which we erected permanent residential tents, 30 beds to a tent.
October 31st, 1944, somewhere in Belgium, my darling, another day of troweling. The construction project begins to look like something. The mud, however, is terrific. An incident occurred during the day that was quite amusing, even though it caused me some discomfort. I was pulling a grading board over the newly poured concrete. I was moving backwards while a man on either side was applying the pressure to level the cement. Suddenly, the wire that I was pulling broke and down I went into a sea of cement. I was a sight, but it struck me funny and I laughed along with all the men who viewed my perfect moving fall. The detachment commander who saw it laughed like hell. At the first opportunity, I told him he owed me a Purple Heart since my pride was wounded in action.
In 1986, he told his letter of November 23rd, 1944, Thanksgiving somewhere in Belgium. My darling, in chapel this morning, we sang a hymn, Count Your Blessings. I counted mine, as I do every day, and my spirit is high. An army hospital is a good place to look around and take inventory of your blessings. I am well. I am safe. I have rare treasures awaiting me at home. I have a promising future. I am thankful. With God's help, we shall find peace and contentment and success. Be of good cheer, my darling. You alone have the power to inspire me with confidence. I can't fail as long as the warmth of your love radiates even at this great distance. Tell our cherub that next Thanksgiving we shall break the turkey wishbone and wish for another one just like her. Love to all, your daddy.
Well, after Thanksgiving, Sam finally became a medic in the 130th General Hospital. November 27, 1944, somewhere in Belgium, my darling, while the doctor is seeing patients, I have these few minutes for a brief message. I'm very well and delighted with what I'm doing. In time, I suspect I'll graduate to the bright aspects of ward man attending. I've just applied my first bandage. A simple thing, I know, but it was a debut. Love, Daddy.
But in his 1986 oral history, he described his hospital work like this. It took some time before they got around to using me in the hospital operation itself. Finally, I was assigned to a psychiatric ward of 30 beds, and single-handedly, I had to manage somehow to keep 30 battle-fatigued patients from tearing the place apart. I had a knack for it. I've always had a warm spot in my heart for young people who are in trouble. And so I treated them very well. I was very kind to them. I wrote letters for them. They would write poems and I would mail them back to their families. As a result of that, I won a citation as the best corps man in the 130th General Hospital. And my reward was a trip to Paris.
The trip to Paris started out gloriously. A lovely French woman he met in a record store on December 21 invited him to go to the Paris Opera the next night to see a production of Othello. It was the first time that an opera had been presented since the war had started, because the opera house had been closed during the German occupation. On December 23rd, he wrote, "My darling, I could hardly check the tears of longing and loneliness for you as I sat enthralled by a performance of Othello in the magnificent National Opera House. I have a program which I am sending to you." December 24th, somewhere in Belgium. "My darling, please do not worry. I am well and safe despite what you may be hearing and reading about the war." December 25th, 1944. "My beloved, Christmas Day is practically over. The day started with a solemn, deeply moving service this morning. How solemn the occasion was, you'll know soon, I hope from my own hand. You must believe that we are safe and well, and no matter what you hear or are prone to believe because of the news."
But here's how he recalled what really happened in his 1986 oral history. Before the second act of the opera, a high-ranking American officer came on stage and said that all Americans and Allied troops must leave the city as quickly as possible and go back to their units. He didn't say why. We later learned it was because our hospital was too close to the Battle of the Bulge, and we had to evacuate from Sinai to Namur, which is 30 miles north of Sinai and is out of the range of the battle. It was very dangerous for American soldiers to be on the streets. The Germans had gotten a hold of American uniforms, trained special groups who spoke English and knew about American baseball and stuff, and were told to mingle with the American troops and knock them off. We went to the transportation office and they said there was a troop train going back to Belgium to the area of Sinai tomorrow, and we had better get on it.
Eventually, he reported in a letter what really happened, but not until months later, in May, when censorship was finally lifted.
Jumping ahead a bit, May 13th, 1945, Sinai, Belgium. My darling, it frightens one to know that now one can say so many things which were well-guarded secrets for so long. We are slow to realize just what has happened, having become accustomed to endless restrictions. Well, darling, this is the little town in the middle of nowhere that stemmed the tide of the Nazi might in that eventful Christmas week of 1944. You can see on the map the bulge, the big red extension, and then the lower one. And just above it is where next to the word Belgium is the word Sinai, a little dot on the map. It was just almost caught into the inside of the bulge itself. Okay. There was no large-scale fighting here in Sinai. Since the actual battle was fought in the Ardennes and at Bastogne, as all the world knew. But we know that had the Nazi spearhead, that bulge, been able to sweep over this immediate vicinity, all of Belgium would have been lost, and possibly much of France again. We were the last ones out, speeding through the bitter cold and dark over roads that were already heavily mined and blocked to stem the enemy. I'll never forget those hours. I couldn't believe it. Were we then to be beaten after all? Were we really the disorganized, unwilling mob we appeared to be? One felt a terrible desire to get behind a big gun and blast away. This running away was humiliating.
And he continued, after arriving in Sinai. I had just jumped out of a jeep, startled by the peculiar air of abandonment of the camp. A moment later, a nervous sergeant barked at me, "Hey, run to the barracks, grab 2 blankets and that's all, and get the hell over to the basement of the hospital." The scene of utter disorder which I saw upon entering the deserted barracks frightened me beyond description. I made some attempt to put my possessions in order, still unwilling to accept the order to abandon everything. I remember with a terrible pang placing the record that I made you in Paris carefully on my bed. Scattered about me were the many little things I had accumulated to send to you. I couldn't take them. I put the little Parisian dancing figures in my pocket, made a hasty and clumsy bundle of my blankets and toilet articles, and fled to the hospital. As I searched for a place to sit down somewhere, I can't remember who remarked, there was a package for me up in an office at the very, very top of the huge building, which was our hospital. I knew that package was from you. I found the scarf you knitted with such care and a box of goodies. Also in your box were the steel wool, silver polish, and some other things which spelled order and neatness in this scene of total confusion. Well, we made an orderly retreat after some painful delay. I can't give you those facts surrounding the retreat, but the story will be told. With your scarf warming me, I regained confidence.
After a month of ferocious fighting in the Battle of the Bulge and many losses, the Allies finally prevailed in January, pushing the Germans out of previously occupied Belgium and France for good. Finally, on May 7th, the Germans surrendered and the war in Europe ended. VE Day, May 7th, 1945, somewhere in Belgium. My darling, it was about 5 p.m. today when we heard the official news. We were at Chow. There was absolutely no demonstration because every man of us at that instant thought only of home. What are our wives doing? What are our folks doing? What are our sweethearts and our friends doing? There was some handshaking, and then we returned to the barracks and we sat on each other's bunks. Gee, I wonder what our families feel. It was repeated over and over, and none of us had an answer. Because I am suddenly frightfully lonely, I'll follow the crowd tonight. We'll simply move in a crowd toward the town, and this thing will gain momentum as we go along. I don't know what I'll do and what I'll say. I know, though, that I must move, and with each step I'll hear the beat of my heart. It keeps saying, Esther, Esther, the worst of this is over. My darling, there is hope now, a real, joyous hope. The day is glorious. Last night I smelled the fertile earth for the first time. It was a strange sensation, suddenly being so aware of the fruitful earth. This is spring at last, I said, little realizing the morrow would be truly spring again for the world. This day then, May 7, 1945, is the beginning. While much of the world's war-weary bow their heads, we raise ours high and say, thank God for his safe guidance and protection. Sam's unit was sent to Camp 20 Grand in France to wait for final orders, which they assumed was going to be movement to the Pacific to join forces there. On the 15th of August, 1945, an official notice was received in the camp from headquarters that the male personnel would sail on August 17th for the United States from Le Havre, France, on the SS Archbishop Lamy. On board the ship, he and a buddy wrote a daily newsletter describing the worldwide events connected with the Japanese verbal surrender and plans for a formal surrender ceremony to be held in September. The Lamy Daily News, Volume 1, Number 1, published aboard the SS Archbishop Lamy, August 19, 1945. Liberty ship carrying troops home. Medics comprise largest group of 4 units going to the States. At sea, August 19th, still holding strong leash on their emotions, officers
and enlisted men, veterans with various lengths of service overseas, are heading for home on this converted Liberty ship, the SS Archbishop Lamme. The Lamme should dock in New York sometime around the 1st of September. Lamme Daily News, Volume 1, Number 10, published aboard the Archbishop Lamme, August 28, 1945. Hello, America. Goodbye, ETO. Going home, going home. The SS Archbishop Lamme, converted Liberty ship, throbbed and lumbered its weary way through a considerate sea. It bore a human cargo of 750 ETO veterans, at long last homeward bound and furlough bound. Whether they'd been away a year or 3, there was no measuring the emotions stirred by the sight of the homeland shore. In 1986, he told his grandson, "When we arrived in New York Harbor on August 31st and saw the Statue of Liberty, all the boats were out whistling and the flags were flying. There was no more war for us. We were going to be dismantled. We came home on that happy note." In conclusion, in bringing our father's story to life, we have learned that we are tapping into a current phenomenon of remembering and retelling the stories of countless GIs who served in World War II. As Sam reflected in his letter of December 6, 1944, "Someday I will be able to say to myself, 'Little man, you've been through some busy days, but you've done a good job.'" And so, just as our father wrote to our mother so many years ago of his intentions to publish his letters, we, his daughters, are now honored to carry out his wishes as a testimonial to a remarkable man, soldier, and writer. Even more, Sam's letters from the war tell a universal story of love, fear, courage, service, philosophy, hope, and gratitude.
I can't wait to see you again. It's only a matter of time. It's over. Sometimes who tells your story? Tell your story. Sometimes who tells your story?
Thank you. Thank you. We welcome your comments, your questions, your reactions, your own stories. We'd love to hear them.
Question.
Somebody speaking.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Kenny Newman. I used to read your dad's column in the Herald 40 years ago, or close to 40 years ago. So I'm a World War II history buff, and your dad never went into Germany,
Oh, no, thank goodness.
and so I'm pretty knowledgeable about the Battle of the Bulge. So he was really not near Bastogne, and I know the history of that battle very well. And what I tuned in late. What army was he a part of?
He was in the medical corps, the 130th General Hospital. So they moved around as the battles shifted, but in October of 44, they were moved to Ciney, Belgium, because France had been liberated and the war had gotten more intense in Belgium, and the injuries were enormous.
Sure.
And this hospital was treating these guys that were brought from the front line into the hospital, and they were all shell-shocked and everything. And this was a psychiatric ward, and he told, we have written somewhere in one of his letters or something, that he was administering what's the word? Insulin shots to these guys. It was supposed to pep them up, I guess. That was the theory then, the medical theory. And they were sent right back into action. And it just broke his heart. It was so stressful.
One more quick question.
Yeah.
When did your dad land on the continent from England? Go through Normandy?
September 1st, 1944.
At Normandy or somewhere else?
In Normandy, in this little town called Carentan.
I know it.
That was.
Do you really? He came up
it
over.
It was near the Utah and Omaha beaches.
Yeah, I know the name.
It was really a kind of a very small. They weren't in the town per se. They were out in the fields in a forest area. And he said in one of his letters that the agriculture had not been taken care of. It had just turned to
the farmers had abandoned their land.
The farmers had abandoned. Everything was wild, and it was just nature. It was just outdoors.
Tents. Yeah,
and they lived in tents.
Thank you very much for asking about that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm also got a project with my dad in World War II, but so one of the things I've been interested in is the points system and how you got home. And he got home extremely early. Do you know why they had so many points?
He didn't think it was early. He wrote about waiting at that cigarette camp 20 grand. They named the camps for cigarette brands, but he thought the wait was endless and eternal. And in fact, it was August, June, 3 months of waiting for a ship because other people were ahead.
It was from July to from mid-July to mid-August. It was about a month. Yeah. But every single letter in that period talks about the delay and the points, and who has so many points and who has this point, these points, and then it went up and it went down and went back and forth. And they were sure they were going to be sent to the Pacific. Yeah. And then August 7th, of course, was the bombing of Hiroshima. And by the 15th, they were on a boat. They would have been on a boat to go home sooner, but there was the backlog. And until Japan was really conquered, they really didn't know really what to do with the people. They were just sort of waiting and hoping, I guess.
Yeah.
Turned out all right.
It's still early because my dad's unit was in combat for 180 days and they didn't get out until 1946.
Oh, right. Oh, I didn't realize that.
So they were giving the medics a lot of points for some reason. I didn't know that. I mean, I'm pretty curious.
You'd think combat would go home sooner.
Or they might have been.
My dad didn't come home till February 46 either.
Wow.
He fought in Battle of the Bulge, and he was a Jewish draftee, not from Hyde Park, but from Lawndale. So.
And he came home healthy. He was okay.
Oh, yes, yes. His father had died, but he was home. But,
Yeah.
but
Well, in reading other things about the war, I've learned that they had to keep a lot of troops in Japan and the other, the Asian Pacific area, just to deal with the rehabilitation and getting things organized. And the biggest cause of the delay was having enough ships to bring the people back. They were just waiting in line, a lot of them. It wasn't for lack of desire to get the troops home.
But I can only imagine how both of you talked of fathers in combat, and how what staying one extra minute away from home must do to.
I'd like to congratulate you on this project that you pulled together, finding the letters, publishing the book, researching it, using his grandson's interviews. It's a great achievement.
Thank you. Roberta's been our driving force. Initially, she did this amazing job of transcribing every single letter. First, she read them all, put them all in chronological order, and then decided to transcribe them so that the handwriting, which was quite legible, still would be able to be shared digitally. And once she did that, we put this all on jump drives simply for our children, for his grandchildren. And we just wanted the family to have these stories. And it was mainly Roberta's sons that said, "Oh, you got to publish this." So
I have a question. Question. Did your father treat wounded German soldiers?
Yes.
And where?
In Sine, first he was in the medical ward, and then after VE Day, they moved him into the dental department. They had a dental clinic in the hospital, and there they were treating the German POWs. They were the war with Germany was over, but they still had all these POWs in their hands and they had the international codes, and
you had to
treat them. And there are some wonderful descriptions in the book about working in this capacity. He said the lieutenant dentist who was in charge of the dental part was a real fiend, and he had such animosity toward these POWs and such hatred that even though the war was over, he used his dental tools as instruments of revenge. You can fill in.
Yes, we also had a German doctor do the same thing.
Yeah. But our father, it was horrible for him because he actually could see the innocent side of these young German soldiers. And he said, they're just boys. Even though they're the enemy, and he felt all the things that one feels. He said, but they were boys told they had no choice either. So
yeah, but the worst type were the SS. Youngsters or 20-year-old, 10 years old in the SS. Hard bitten, don't tell me we lost. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did your dad speak German or Yiddish?
Yiddish. He was fluent in Yiddish, and so he understood a lot of the German. Yeah. And he got along in Belgium also because of the Yiddish. He tried to learn French. My mother was a French teacher and loved French, and she would have thrived there, but he tried for her sake to learn some French. It didn't go so well, but he said walking down the streets in Sine and listening to the people speak, the ones who spoke Flemish, he could understand them. He had
Yep.
no problem understanding the Flemish. When they switched to French, that was a different problem.
By the way, I don't know if people will stay longer for this conversation, which we're enjoying a lot, but I thought I would just hold this up. Let's see, I've got some light reflecting on it. But this is the Somewhere in Europe letters of World War II letters of Sam Lesner. And so this book has not all of his letters, because he wrote for every single day, usually twice a day, for 2 whole years, and you can do the math. It's a lot of letters that initially Roberta organized and we read through. We selected the ones that were specifically his war experience. He had among his letters many others that had to do with family stuff that was going on. But we're very proud that this collection tells stories that soldiers didn't come home and tell or talk about. They got on with their lives, of course. So it's available at Amazon.com.
And also I have
yeah.
a box of books in my house. If anyone wants one, I'm happy to hand deliver it in Hyde Park, anywhere in Hyde Park. So just
So
let
I have
us know.
another, oops, I have another question that came to mind with that. So was he having to use Vmail?
Yes.
Oh, yes. We
Yeah,
have pictures.
So he was
of-
confined to the little space, yeah.
Yeah, we have pictures of the V-mail.
We have originals.
Yeah,
We have
but
a
in the
few.
book, we
Oh,
have
yeah.
some pictures of them.
Yeah, those little
They're
snapshots.
little tiny, yeah.
What they happened, he wrote a regular paper, regular size. It was a form, a email form, but then they had some kind of an ability to photo reduce it.
Oh, is that what they?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
It was film, it was microfilm.
Yeah. That's,
And you know, it was early days of microfilm, and then they would reconstitute them as these tiny little photos.
Oh,
And so that's what people got.
they were
So
tiny.
that would create a writing problem for him as a writer. Having
What
that
did
little
the-
space.
What did these stand for then?
Victory.
victory.
It was Victory Mail.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
that's positive thinking. Okay, great. Anybody else? We're enjoying this very much.
Well, I'm just curious, or not curious. I'm
Yeah. Mhm.
Fascinated by all of this handwritten mail, which in our current society is totally foreign to us. We do not do that anymore. We are, and this is one of the things I kept thinking while I was reading the book, was that, and I'm old enough to know about this, but somebody 20 years old reading this book would say, why didn't he just send an email?
Oh my gosh.
You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? The time lag was so obvious in all of these emails when he would say at some point, I just received your mail from October 12th, October 13th, October 14th, and September 15th.
Yeah.
Like it all came bundled together. What a very weird disconnect that must have been.
There was one little mention early in our talk where he talked about, well, we quoted from him, the slowness of the mail. That's such a recurring theme for all the soldiers prior to the world of email and internet communications. So they would wait for mail call, and then names would be called, and each soldier with bated breath waited for his name, which meant he was hearing from somebody from home, and then his name wouldn't be called, and then he would just be so deflated. Well, and tomorrow maybe. And they came in bundles when it finally came. So imagine you then would take them and you'd read chronologically the answers to some of the questions you asked a month ago, or clearly several weeks ago. But those questions didn't arrive until recently. And then the answers were written by Esther. And that took 2 more weeks. So they were forever having to try to figure out, what did I ask her? Why is she answering this? It was very disjointed and very welcome, every piece of mail. I have thoughts about what you said, though, about email. At least with letters, we can find them if they were saved and they're preserved. We have them. Emails, that's not going to happen. Our stories that we might tell each other through email. Imagine somebody going to go through those archives and dig those up for similar reasons that we did. They may dig them up if they're the FBI looking for something, you know, but I think they're lost. All the experiences people share in email are going to be lost. So I think it's very sad that we're really lost a culture of letter writing. I don't know if anyone else agrees or disagrees with that.
That was going to be my comment, that what a treasure trove that we won't have with emails. So you were so fortunate.
Yeah. And all the other people who are finding things in boxes, just as we said.
Yes.
We've met many people at this point who say, oh, we have a box too. And some of them have not opened that box to read, but after hearing our talk, they've made a point to go home and finally sit down and see what treasures are in those boxes. Yeah.
I was interested in how well he was able to write and how interesting it was, despite the knowing that everything was going to be censored. My father was also, he was in the Navy, he was there, and he was so conscious of everything being censored, so that the letters were not very descriptive or even very interesting until after the end of the war, and then he could write about his trip to his leave in Paris and so forth. But the rest of it, it's like I'm doing the same job that I told you about a couple, you know, and it's very frustrating, you know.
I agree with you, Carol. Yeah. Another factor that made it astounding to me to see how much he wrote and how long the letters were was that in one of them, he said that he was writing with the stub of a pencil. And when that was done, he had to finish because there was nothing left. There were no other pencils, and they were writing by candlelight in the tent.
In the tent. Isn't that amazing?
Lantern light, you know, whatever light the fire doesn't give off much. And so under those circumstances, he wrote these 4- and 5-page, very, very meticulous, small handwriting. As well, now you know how detailed they were. That's amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how he had that much time. I try to write letters lately. I really try to keep that going, but they're usually cards. You know, I'll make a message on a card. It takes a while to do that. And I'm not trying to tell a whole story through a letter. So very time consuming. I guess he got up extra early in the morning to do it before, was it roll call or whatever that, before they had inspection in the morning. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in the fact that my dad was also in the Second World War. He was in the Pacific Theater, and he was a ham operator on a cargo plane. And there are no letters that survive from his war experience. He was a single guy, a very young guy. He was 19 or so. So anything he wrote would be to his mother, which we have no records of that. But I have this huge photo archive of his that he took while he was in the Pacific. And what's interesting to me about that is that there are all aspects of Army life that he took pictures of that apparently were not censored. And I'm not sure how that happened, but I still have this huge box of photos of you know, these atolls in the Philippines and the tents and all that stuff, which I didn't see in your dad's book, and I'm sort of curious as to whether or not they had photography, they had access to photography. My dad obviously did. He was fighting in the Pacific, which of course went on much later. He was on a plane. He was not, he was traveling around a lot, let's put it that way. But as I said, the only archive I have from my own father is these still photographs of the war, and some very ugly ones.
Oh, but it's a wonderful archive to have. Are they labeled
sure.
so that you know what these scenes are?
No, only from what I remember him telling me as a child. Once in a while, he would get out what we used to call the picture box, where he would take out his pictures from World War II, because he didn't really like to talk about it. He really didn't. But the story that came down through our family was the fact that that's where he got the monkey. He got a pet monkey in the Philippines, which he actually brought home with him when he was discharged. And the monkey was so family history. So we would say, show us pictures of the monkey, and he would get the box out from World War II and show us pictures of the monkey. Anyway, it just, but that's all we had from him was those pictures.
If I could just comment that you were fortunate in having pictures, because that's kind of analogous to people no longer writing. People aren't taking pictures that are on paper. And if you think of the billions and billions and billions and trillions of pictures that are taken virtually every day, almost all of them will be gone and not available to people 50 or 75 or 100 years from now.
Yes.
The pictures on paper that were taken, I have my mother's scrapbook, or picture book rather, from her vacation trip in 1923 to Yellowstone, because it's black and white on paper and things like that. And people are not going to have that unless they're very careful to keep redoing pictures electronically so they don't get faded out or lost or something.
Regarding our pictures,
You're right, Joseph.
We just, at the time we wrote the book, we didn't have the pictures. We just found them a few months ago, thanks to our isolation in the house. We were going through boxes and closets and drawers and everything. Voila, another box. We opened it up. Photographs from the war, a whole collection, most of them taken by him. He had pictures of every single one of his buddies in multiple different scenes of the buildings, everything. And we've incorporated some of them into our slideshow now, but we have to wait for the next edition of the book to get them in the book.
Judy wrote, and I really appreciate this message you wrote, Judy, in the chat, that the letters what's the word I want? I know it.
She says
I know. We've got the letters interspersed with interviews. And we did find that absolutely fascinating, but we just had the letters at first. So we only had the version that our father chose to share with our mother. And of course, he didn't want to scare her. He wanted to tell her it was a grand adventure and he was completely fine and healthy and don't worry. And he painted a very rosy picture. Then Roberta's son, Eddie, said, wait, Mom, I've got the interview tapes that he did when he was in high school in 1986. And he saved them, bless his heart. And he found them and sent them to us. And so by listening to the interview, our father by that time was at 40 years later, talked about it to his grandson. And he told him a truer version. Thanks to that, we were able to see what really happened. And hopefully that really is interesting for us to put two versions together we did that in the talk in a couple of instances.
We
So-
were almost ready to go to press when he told us one day, my son, that I got these interviews. I said, what are you talking about? And he told us, he sent us the whole thing. We started all over again, transcribing the section about the war, and we were astonished because there it was, almost paragraph by paragraph. Here's what he said in the letter, and here's how
What
he
really
told
happened.
it. And
Yeah.
so then we added all that to the book.
So thank you, Judy, for that comment too.
Question.
Yeah.
Did you do any research into his unit, or just or
Yeah.
try to meet? Is there anybody still alive from
Yeah.
the people he served with?
John Stamos
I don't know,
alive?
it's John Stamos, who was the state's attorney, I think, for
Let's see.
Illinois. He was in the 130th General Hospital. He was in Chicago, and they became very good friends after the war and saw each other socially with their families. We lived near each other. And also we found, at the same time we found the photographs, we found more documents that he had saved. The letters were in one box, and that was just the letters. But he saved everything from his whole career as a journalist. And these were in scrapbooks and boxes in my basement. And
It's 60 years.
we
worth of
decided to
saving.
go through all that stuff thanks to Mr. COVID. And we finally had the time to do it. And we ended up sending everything to the Newberry Library. But while we're going through all of his newspaper stuff, we found all this additional stuff about the war that he had mixed in, just thrown into bags or boxes, all mixed together. And it's a real treasure trove of material.
It might mean a second edition is coming.
Yeah,
Well, we'll
right.
see.
We're gonna
But I
try.
saw you reacted there. We're thrilled that the Newberry valued and wanted his entire journalistic archives. That's 60 years of what he saved of every day and everything he ever wrote. And so it's being cataloged there, and it'll have a wonderful life at the Newberry Library, available to anybody to go in there and use as their research. So we're very happy about that.
We haven't decided yet what to do with the original letters. There are several places we're considering, including the Newberry, to add it just to put everything together. But we're also considering the World War II Museum in New Orleans.
I think that makes sense.
We were about to make a visit there. We planned to go in spring of 2020. And of course that got sidetracked. So we're going to try to get there this coming spring and check it out and meet people, and maybe we'll donate the letters there, because they're
actively looking
for documentation. Yeah. They want it in every form: verbal, oral histories, written, anything they can get, artifacts, anything they can get their hands on, they want to collect and preserve. So for the rest of you, if you also have archival material of any kind dealing with World War II, would be a marvelous place to consider donating it. World War II Museum, New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
So I had another thought about the letters, because I have as you say, I have a similar story of a box of letters. You think he knew that they were kept, if they were kept by his wife? By your mother?
Oh, yeah, they were kept by he knew that because they must have gotten back into his hands, because they were stored. We found when she predeceased him, when he died, we had to clean out the house. He had a house, tri-level house with a big crawl space. And when we went down there, there were floor to ceiling cases and of everything from his entire life that he saved. And we just moved all this stuff to my house, and
We're sure
stored it.
he knew that was all there.
And stored it in the, so when he came back from the war, she must have handed him the package that she had saved, because then it ended up with all of his collections from his life, mainly from the newspaper. So yeah, he knew he had those letters, definitely.
Yeah. But he decided, even as a writer, he decided not to touch them. It's interesting.
He was busy.
He was
the
done,
busiest.
and
That's true.
as Tom Brokaw said, it was over, done. They didn't want to.
But
it was
he
done.
did continue to think he was going to write a book. He had that in his mind.
Well,
But we saw him being very, very busy, and he had a garden, and I think the garden needed his attention instead of the book. Judy, I have to ask you, you must have read the book. From your comment, I'm guessing that you read the book, because you refer to the couple of corresponding letters about Roosevelt's death.
Yes.
We didn't mention that in the talk, but that's in the
I
book.
did.
On the day that Roosevelt died, Dad sat down immediately to write. His heart was broken, and he wrote to his wife about, and at the same moment, at the same time, she was writing to him. Their letters crossed in the mail, but we have both, and they're both in the book. They're very beautiful.
we actually had this in our talks. We've done 15 talks before this one. And we did include those two letters, but we cut them because we added stuff and we didn't want to go over the time limit. So it's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it is interesting. So I see your picture there, Judy. So I think I'm talking to you. There you go. Do you want to unmute?
Too much noise in the background, but I thoroughly enjoyed. I had not read that much correspondence. You know, these letters are pretty rare, and so I had not read that much correspondence. And it was I don't know if relentless was the right word, but I was just amazed at the number of letters, and I almost wondered whether or not your father personally had gotten something out of being so positive for your mother and the family too.
Oh, yes.
You know, yeah.
Oh, you're very sensitive. Yes.
Oh,
that was part of our father's personality and point of view, perspective on life. He was very positive. And I think you're right. He got something out of that, as well as helping those around him feel like his children growing up, feel positive. Yeah. Thank you. Somebody is, Anara is leaving soon, and we thank you for staying. We thank you all. This is just wonderful that you stayed to talk back to us afterwards and help us know what things interest you in this whole saga. Yes, go ahead.
And it's very wonderful and moving that you have put this together for us. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Fred.
Thank
Good
you,
to see
Fred.
you, Fred.
Good to see you, Roberta. And hello, Judy.
Thank
A
you.
question about
Yes,
your family. Did you guys still have family in Europe during the war? Did you lose any in the Holocaust?
No,
Nobody.
no,
Nobody.
No one was there.
they were all from Russia, and they got out the 1890s, the turn of the century. Yeah. Both
Lucky.
both of them. Both
I spend a lot of time on the website with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, tuning into their live events.
Mm.
So I was just wondering if
yeah, I do too. Yeah.
My dad was Dutch, and so the stories in my family come out of his family that was in Holland during the war. And my cousin, who was in the Dutch underground, two cousins were in the Dutch underground. I have some letters. I'm not sure if they're from that time, but they're all in Dutch. And my Dutch
get them translated.
struggle. It'll be a struggle. But they had some. And my uncle, my aunt and uncle. This was one of my dad's sisters that we were the closest to. They had rented an apartment in their house. They had a house that had a store on the lower level and then living quarters. And the Germans came and took the Jewish family away. And a short time later, they came back and took my uncle because they had rented to Jews. And so my uncle was in a concentration camp in Holland for a year. And my cousin Pete was underground because he was at an age that the Germans were taking young men for slave labor. And the underground came to his family and said, "You need to come underground or you're going to get taken away." And so he spent quite a bit of time underground. And there were some escape stories. I actually met him. I knew him because I went over several times, once when I was in high school, and then again later on, and spent some time with him. But it was one of the scariest ones was his sister was doing false papers for the underground. And the Germans would just pop in every now and then. And she had been working and the equipment was up on a table. And the Germans came in. They threw a newspaper over the equipment and the Germans didn't look. And so she survived and wound up in Australia after the war. But anyway, and then Pete came home one time and the Germans showed up and his mother just played dumb Dutch housewife to give him enough time to get out of the house in the back. And they lived in a little village between Rotterdam and The Hague. And behind their house were acres of greenhouses. So he could get out and into the greenhouses and get away. But he must have seen some tough things during the war. I think he didn't really quite ever get over it.
Yeah.
The Germans were very tough on the Dutch because they were almost German speaking and because of the similarity in language.
Well, the Dutch have not been too fond of the Germans either.
Right.
You always have to be very careful when you hear somebody speaking what you think is German, but don't ask them if they're German. Ask them if they're Dutch.
Alsjeblieft.
I also, brings back memories to me. I'm going to see what my father, few letters that we have, but also so many of us were children at that time, and we were children when our fathers were away, and maybe we can sense some of the social and emotional and psychological aspects to having your parent away and then return home. And from a child's point of view, when I look back about what my father, he would tell us things that kids would want to know. Like we all got a kick out of clotheslines with the army blankets because they said they used them as latrines. They would go between the blankets. and tea and everything. And so we all thought that that was just the funniest thing ever.
Funny, yeah.
And I appreciated some of the photographs that you saw, but I think it's you guys did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We encourage all of you to, if you even think you might have something somewhere, go look for it and find it and bring the letters to life or whatever memorabilia you find. There is a national and I think even worldwide interest now in World War II and retelling the story, and what we get from the soldiers themselves has nothing to do with what's in the history books. We researched all the books. We went to every book we found on the library shelf about World War II and the ETO. And it's nothing about except this tank, how many tanks moved from here to there and how many days it took, and all the equipment and the armaments, and you don't know anything about the soldiers, about the daily life, about what it felt like being there. But it's in these letters.
Kenneth?
One funny point was your dad raving about the food, and what Carol brought up about censorship makes that much more plausible, because my husband was in the service and he had nothing good to say about food.
Right.
So that was very tactful of your father.
Right.
I was curious if you wrote, well, I know about the World War II Museum in New Orleans, but did you also write the Pentagon to find out if they had information on your father's unit?
No.
Oh, somebody gave me all the information to do that. I still have it.
Do they
haven't
really?
done it. Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you for reminding me.
Oh yeah, I mean there's
homework. Now
Gotta
she
do
has some
that.
homework.
Gotta do that.
I'm very active between the Holocaust Museum and also the Monuments Men Foundation. There is still worldwide interest in all the art that's missing. And I highly encourage people, if you have cable at home, I don't have cable anymore, there's a series of programs that was done with the Monuments Men Foundation on the theft of art all over Europe.
Oh, yeah.
And very interesting stuff. And the Holocaust Museum has indirectly got involved a little bit of that. They just had a live video program about that a couple weeks ago. There's an awful lot that's currently live with new programming and new documentaries. If people have more interest in the subject, you'd be surprised between the computer and the TV what you can find.
And this is 2021, and yet the World War II, 1945, is, I don't know, more, it's getting more attention now than it has for decades.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think some of that has to do with the group of children of the World War II veterans who are becoming much more aware of the legacy of their parents. So anyway, Judy and Roberta, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your presentation was wonderful. The book was fascinating, and I just on behalf of the Hyde Park Historical Society and the Hyde Park Book Club, I want to thank you for everything you've done tonight. And
for inviting us.
Thank you all.
It was an honor.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Be well and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Right. And I would just like to say in closing that the Hyde Park Book Club will be on hiatus until January, when we have Anergard and Gegard Chamberlains, the daughters of Samgard, who will be reading their poetry for us. So that's going to be coming up. I will be sending out messages about that. But I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and wish you all a pleasant evening.
And that'll be another sister act, won't it?
Yes.
It will be, yes. They call it sibling revelry.
Okay, great.
All right.
Bye.
All right.
night,
Good night,
folks.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.